Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Great to be here today, to see all the energy to move forward and to have 36 companies already sign up to the GAA. That's fantastic. The key word that we have heard today is the last one in the title: collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. And as Vanessa said, what I'd like to do is to talk about some work that we have done to actually look at the opportunity for collaboration. Olam asked us to do a piece of work, to do a landscape assessment, to go out and actually ask people what they want to collaborate about, how they want to collaborate, who they want to collaborate with, what they've got experience of in the past, and where the biggest impact could be for going forward. We wanted to make this the basis for an expanded conversation so that we can talk about the potential collaborations within the agribusiness sector, conditions for formal engagement going forward, and what are the key touch points to know where, when, how, and with whom you want to collaborate. As part of this, as Vanessa said, we wanted to give people the opportunity to generate ideas about how the agribusiness sector could change, potential future models for collaboration, and that's what we're going to share today. Now, we were the knowledge partners for this event, so we first went and engaged our members, and then members of the agribusiness sector throughout the whole of the value chain who aren't our members, and we'll talk about those findings. But also, this is not a finished product. This is a work in progress, and yes, you've guessed it, you're going to do the work. So this afternoon, I hope you've still got some energy left, because we will be using the pigeonhole technology, but this time we ask the questions and you are doing the answering, so stay awake. But I think I'm very heartened because, you heard Jeremy this morning. Jeremy said he'd never been in such a room of such expertise and such leadership in the agribusiness sector. Simon from Sime Darby called you the League of Extraordinary Agriculturalists. So I hope you live up to that the description. And Frankie Wadaja said you were the right people in the right place at the right time. So please, can you live up to that expectation? So where do we start? Well, you've seen the slide several times today, but this is the framework that we are all working on. This has to be shown virtually in every meeting going forward from now on. This is the plan for 2030. Now, we've got the 17 SDGs, but clearly, according to the UN, we've heard it today, although Andrew said we've made great progress, there are around 800 million people who don't have enough food to live a healthy, active life, and that's about 1 in 9 people on Earth. That's quite a staggering prospect. 31% of the global population works in the agricultural sector. 70% of the people considered to be poor rely mostly on agriculture as a source of income and employment. While at the same time, on the other side, depletion, degradation of land and water, they propose serious challenges to the environment, and that will affect livelihoods. So in short, that's the challenge that both governments and business are going to face to fully respond to these sustainable development goals, if they're going to enhance food security through sustainable agriculture within 1 generation by 2030. Now, what's new, as Peter said earlier, is now it's recognised the private sector has a clear role to play, and they've been attributed clear roles under the new SDGs. And clearly, it's not just about food. If we're going to get the SDG targets, and specifically that SDG 2, it's going to be made all the harder if we have to meet the additional challenges around climate. So if we look at the SDGs, 17 SDGs, we've talked about them. Your sector is such a fundamental sector. It has links to all of those SDGs, but some of them are a bit more pressing than others. We've talked SDG 2. People talk about it as the 1 on 0 hunger. Well, it's a lot more than that. The complete title is End Hunger, Achieve Food Security and Improve Nutrition, and Promote Sustainable Agriculture. So it's quite a broad, it is a broad goal. Unless we reduce and eliminate hunger, we won't meet the rest of the SDGs. And unless we meet some of the other SDGs, we're not going to eliminate hunger. So clearly, they are all related. Similarly, SDG 1, no poverty. 80% of the world's extreme poor live in the rural areas. Agriculture is the single largest employer in the world, as we've heard today. Agricultural growth in low-income and agrarian economies is at least twice as effective as growth in other sectors in reducing hunger and poverty. So clearly SDG 1, very important. SDG 3, good health and well-being. I mean, good health starts with nutrition. Without the security of daily food, you can't lead healthy and productive lives. SDG 6, clean water and sanitation. We've heard crops and livestock use around 70% of water withdrawals. In some countries, that's up to 95%. It's reckoned by 2025, 1.8 billion people will live in countries or regions with absolute water scarcity, not relative, but absolute water scarcity. We talked a little bit about inequalities, gender inequalities, reducing inequalities, that's SDG 10. Improving productivity and incomes of small producers, typically the poorer members of society, is going to help us reach SDG 10. We've heard about responsible consumption and production. We know a third of all food doesn't actually get eaten. It gets lost or it gets wasted. And then climate action, life on land, and the rest. Okay, so going back to the answer to the question. Matthew, can we have the answer to the question? There we are. Okay, so it actually does it in real time. So vote quickly. Don't vote often. The question is, has your company actually mapped its activities against the SDGs? And we can see in this room, you're an enlightened bunch, 61%, 62% say yes, about 60-40, I'd say, have done that. Those of you who are in the know might want to look at a tool, the SDG Compass that WBCSD developed with GRI and the Global Compact to help companies understand what the SDGs are about, and also to actually work out what's material for their company, to give them a bit of a compass in how to steer their way through this. But that's encouraging as a start, so thank you for that. The SDGs are the 17, but if you actually dig down into them, you get to these 169 targets. And when we talked to the people, yourselves, companies in this area, it was clear that it wasn't just about zero hunger, that there were 3 of the targets within that were particularly important. And the ones that came up in conversations particularly was around doubling the productivity and income of smallholders, ensuring sustainable agriculture and resilient food production, and then the other one, 2A, increasing agricultural investment in developing countries. Now, clearly, you can see from this complicated spider's web on the screen, simply by taking those 3 targets within goal 2, there are links in there to all of the others, to 16, to 13, to 12, many of the other goals. So it's more of a network of goals that are all clearly interrelated. So when we start looking at where we want to put our action, one action in one area impacts a lot of others. Actions in other areas will impact working on zero hunger and sustainable agriculture. Okay, so perhaps a couple of words about the report that you are going to help us complete. The report started as a desktop research. Olam and WBCSD selected 40 companies. Many of you are in the room today. And we did desktop research on what is it that they are actually doing and what is it they are saying they're doing. So we went through all of their published information. We then followed that up by selecting 20 of those companies, and we did an online survey with them. And then we had live interviews to actually get to the questions. That produced the report that we'll talk about today, but that report will be then informed with the outcomes of today, the outcomes of these discussions, the answers to some of the questions we'll ask today. And we will finalize that report, and everybody will receive a copy of that report shortly after this event is over. What was interesting when we looked at the inputs we got, we found that of those companies, we could identify there were over 200 projects, there were over 96 corporate commitments in that piece of work. Interestingly, the 96 corporate commitments were mainly focused on environmental aspects. The projects were focused on social aspects. Why was that? Well, we would surmise often sustainability strategies start with the environmental pillar, and that's where you make your commitments. The environmental side is a little more quantitative, and you tend to measure it a little more. Companies realize the social part is very important. It's not quite so quantitative, it's much more complex, and it tends to be project-based. But that was an interesting finding from the start. We took input from across the agribusiness value chain. You can see we talked to consumer product companies, such as Unilever, Nestle, and others. We talked to some of the large retailers, Walmart, M&S, trading companies, ADM, Bunge, and others, producers, Sime Wilmar, all contribute to this report. The combined revenue of those that we included in this report today is around $1.4 trillion. So pretty significant players all through the agricultural chain. If we look at what the projects and the commitments are in the middle, the projects around the outside here. And we asked which aspects of the SDGs, and particularly SDG 2, were you focusing on? And it was pretty clear that goals 2.3 and 2.4 were where most people were spending most of their effort. Sustainable and resilient food production in agriculture, and the goal to double agricultural productivity and the incomes of small-scale producers. So we've heard a lot today about the importance of the smallholders. Our research has shown that this is where you, the agribusiness chain, are actually putting most of their efforts so far. There are others around maintaining genetic diversity, increasing investment and so on, but the predominant focus has been doubling productivity through smallholders and sustainable and resilient aspects. So that's what you're talking about publicly. We then actually ask the question, so that's what you're doing, where do you think the biggest potential going forward is? And it was pretty much the same. It's clear that sustainable resilience is a key part where you see potential. Agricultural productivity. The third one was increasing investments in agriculture. So they were the three top ones. So from this, we would draw the conclusion that any collaboration in the agribusiness area really should focus on those areas. That's where you are investing the most. It's where you have most projects, you have most public commitments, and also where you actually believe going forward you will have the biggest impact. Okay, so that's what's happening so far. Let's turn to the other side and look at some of the reasons for focus and the sorts of commodities that are most under study at the moment. So we'll ask you the next question. Can we have the next question up, please? Okay. Which commodity has the most value at risk for your company? We asked this in the survey. We'd like to ask you the same question to see if you agree or you've changed your mind since we asked some of you during the survey. So we've got on there, okay, and we're talking about most value at risk. Now clearly we will probably see a slight difference in region, bearing in mind where we are, but let's see, these things move quite quickly. Good. Okay, so you're heavily in favor of cocoa, palm, other, okay, so, and then grain, sugar, soybean. Now, what we found when we did the survey, perhaps on a more global basis, was somewhat different. Same ones, but perhaps in a different order. When we asked before, soy came up top, so in a way cocoa is one of the least on our original survey. In this room, it's clearly much higher. The evidence we had: soy first, the broad acre row crops, palm, sugar, rice, plus coffee and cocoa. So some difference in order. There were some others that came up slightly more minor around fish, tomatoes, and other crops. But perhaps some difference in order, but I think it's the same list. What was interested from the work we did was there wasn't actually a difference in the prioritization by the different parts of the value chain. So traders, input providers, food producers all basically came up with the same ideas. Okay, so these are the areas at risk, the commodities at risk in terms of value. What about the parts of the world that you think are the most at risk? Which is the next question? Okay, what's the most critical geographical region for your company's supply and sourcing? Now, again, bearing in mind where we are, we may have a slightly different answer, but we'll see if you agree with where the global survey came out. Okay, so clearly Southeast Asia because we're here. North America high too. Then South Africa, South America. Okay, so just a minute, we'll use the data we got from the meeting, we'll incorporate into the report. But clearly, if you look at the results in the report, you can see actually Latin America, South America came out the highest. North America, Southeast Asia coming out next. So then West Africa came out as a clear, India and South Africa. So somewhat slightly different, but clearly this is not just one region's risk. This is a global issue. And what is interesting, if you actually look at where people see the risks and then you superimpose that where climate change variability is high, you get a pretty good correlation. This is the Center for Global Development's agriculture vulnerability hotspots under climate change scenario. So it seems, and we'll talk about that a little later, areas at risk and climate variability seem to go very closely together. We then also asked, so why are you doing this? What do you see as the business driver for supporting work against SDG 2? What's in it for you? And we came up with a whole range of different answers. At one end, we see factors such as labor and governance. These areas to the left of the graph, these are areas where business has most control. And these actually are considered the least concern. At the other end of the x-axis, we see those factors over which business has very little control, and all of which in some way are related to climate change. Water, availability, volume, variability, the access to inputs, cost of inputs, regular and secure supply of commodities, soil health, pests and diseases. All these were cited as the highest risk. You can see it at the right-hand end. And these are really where your businesses are at the mercy of the elements. So risk is high on the right, and these are the reasons that companies are engaged in this work. So we can take it from these responses and the key regions that you have been identified. Collaboration on climate change, both in terms of adaptation, but also and mitigation, are likely to be a high focus for any agribusiness collaboration going forward. Because agriculture has a key place in the climate agenda, it has a key place in the INDCs. The Paris Agreement is now fairly close to being ratified. At the last count, we had somewhere 27 or so of the 55 nations needed for the agreement to actually come into force. China and the US joined up just recently, so momentum is still growing. Next week, there's hopes that we will get to ratification by Climate Week next week in New York. I'm not sure that we will get there, but clearly things are moving and moving fast after Paris. Now, as part of their global commitments, 80% of the INDCs, the intended nationally declared contributions, these are the promises that governments have made in Paris of what they're going to do about climate change. 80% of them include agriculture in their mitigation targets. Equally important, given the responses to business drivers and climate change vulnerability, over 60% have also included agriculture in their adaptation strategies. Agriculture is clearly seen as a big part of many solutions. Now, how many countries are well placed at the moment to include agriculture in their mitigation and adaptation strategies? And I would say probably only a handful. So there is a big piece of work here on how agriculture will be developed, how it can contribute in the climate targets of many countries. And then clearly there's the issue of climate finance. Many countries, they're going to need considerable financial assistance in addition to technical assistance if they're going to meet their targets. So that brings us to the next question. Do you see the INDCs that include agriculture as an opportunity for your business, or do you see being included a threat to your business? Great. So opportunity is clearly winning. Okay, could I just, in the room, who said opportunity? Must be lots of you. Okay, we have one. Okay.
Just very quickly, I think at least the government has acknowledged the agricultural sector importance in addressing the issue. So it definitely is an opportunity for companies like us to have the chance to work with the government and try to align our mission together with the government mission.
Okay, so there's an opportunity for alignment. Any others?
Otherwise, you'll be living in denial.
Well, that's true. If, as someone said, if something is inevitable, learn to love it. Okay, thank you. Somebody said threat. Who said threat? Who wants to own up to a threat? Anybody want to own up to a threat? I'm trying to see through the lights here. No, the threats have gone quiet. Okay. Some people thought it was a threat. Perhaps they don't want to tell us what the threat is. But clearly, this is a big opportunity. And that's, I think, a good starting point for the GAA for an agribusiness collaboration. There seem to be lots of opportunities there to be built on. Okay, one of the other questions we wanted to probe was, so where are you putting your money? I saw earlier today someone said, consumers when asked said that they would pay more for more sustainable products. And when I see data like that, I always say, yes, but let's see what they buy. And so a good test of what companies are interested in is to look at their investment priorities. And so we did this, and what we see is what came top of investment priorities: crop productivity, sustainable agriculture, smallholders again. So smallholders have come up in virtually every conversation we've had today. Community resilience and skills. Interestingly, given the fact that we will need a lot of finance in terms of delivering the SDGs and delivering on climate, the fact that access to finance did not come high up is an interesting one. Ditto, technology and services wasn't at the top of the list either. So that's interesting why that wasn't. But if we focus on the ones that were, basically you've identified investments in productivity, and these are happening through investing in smallholders, the future of smallholders, training for smallholders. Now, there's no uniform information about the effectiveness of these training programs. Some of you reported that you reckon the effectiveness can be as low as 10%. And if you look at the desktop analysis, we're only reaching a very small percentage of smallholders. So probably less than 10%. So we're reaching 10% of 10%. So effectively, we're benefiting 1% of smallholders. And that's probably a generous estimate. Now, you can either say that's shockingly low, or you can say that's a huge opportunity for improvement. And if people are looking to increase crop productivity, and sustainable lifestyles, then building on that low start, that 1%, is a huge way to go going forward. If we are talking about collaboration, it's good to know where we start from. So we wanted to ask all of the respondents, what's your experience in collaboration? Who have you collaborated with before? What's worked? What hasn't worked? And you can see on this chart, the green is very large experience, light green less experience, and the very pale virtually no experience of who you have experience of collaborating with. Now, it's not really surprising. Most companies have experience of collaborating with research institutes. It's about knowledge. We've heard several comments around this is a highly competitive, not necessarily collaborative sector. But there has been medium amounts of collaboration with direct competitors, less so government agencies. Again, interesting that on one side, the need for finance, on here, the fact that collaboration with asset management, private equity is the lowest of all is perhaps surprising. But the comment earlier that you didn't see that the finance part was the priority might explain that. So mainly experience with on the technical side, on research, with NGOs, with technical implementing agencies. So you can see that's where the experience is at the moment. One of the things that the direct competitors, though, are listed on here, but when we actually probed a little deeper, it wasn't necessarily working with direct competitors. It was tended to be through roundtables, third-party initiatives, rather than a direct working with competitors. But then if you actually look at the next slide is looking at the willingness. So on the left, you see the last slide, the experience. But on the right, you actually see the willingness to collaborate. The dark blue is high level of willingness. The light blue is maybe, or openness. And the very light that's a no. But from this, it would seem that you are a very collaborative lot. You are either willing or under certain circumstances, you're willing to work together, even with direct competitors, although there is quite a sizable maybe section. But there's a willingness to work more with direct competitors and with financing organisations, which is very positive in light of what you've launched today. So this opens up the opportunity, new models of collaboration, and then how can we actually do that to achieve the scale that we need to be effective? The conditional openness is around working together under the right conditions. And one of the things we want to ask you and probe a little deeper is, so what are the right conditions? So to understand what it is that would turn from a maybe to a yes, we're willing to collaborate. And that'll be one of the questions we'll get you on at the end. If we actually look at your preferred forms of collaboration, you can see that this sector would prefer to work with the value chain. That's great. With non-competitive companies, also good. Definitely with competitors on a pre-competitive basis. Now, that's the difference there in that the last one we asked, will you collaborate? And we had lots of maybes. But if you get specific and say it's about pre-competitive areas, then it's much more positive. So again, there's good guidance there for going forward. It's like, at the WBCSD, we work in the pre-competitive space, setting frameworks, devising tools, building partnerships, and so on and so forth. Not within the competitive space, but equally very effective going forward. One of the interesting other side notes from this was there seemed to be less appetite for multi-stakeholder roundtables. I think there was a feeling that perhaps we got too many, and perhaps there needs to be some M&A activity between some of the roundtables. But that was an interesting sideline that came up in some of the competition, in some of the discussions that we had. So I'll give you a warning of one of the questions that's yet to come, and that's around what would those pre-competitive sustainability topics be? What are those areas that you would like to see on the list for the GAA that are pre-competitive but would benefit from an organisation as broad and diverse as the GAA could be to deal with? So there's our top bets for collaboration going forward. Plenty of, I think that's a rich seam at the bottom there to start mining. Now, the collaboration benefits. We ask companies, so what do you see are the collaboration benefits? Not surprisingly, around shared learning. So a place to actually share what works and doesn't work so that good practice can be understood, shared, and reapplied. A safe space where people can talk about these areas. But one of the big areas that was seen as a benefit was not just about bringing good things back into your own business, but by actually working together to deal with systemic issues, so challenging systemic issues. And this is one of the things about a collaboration like the Global Agribusiness Alliance. A place that allows companies to do things together that either they couldn't or wouldn't want to do by themselves. So working on how do we get to that word that Peter used earlier, transformation. How do we end up with a transformation? Not just incremental change, but actually start looking at systemic issues and systemic change. Other benefits that were clearly seen, if it's going to be value chain, supply chain management is an obvious one. Efficiencies, cost reductions, these are all great things to add in too. Shared risk, shared data, shared knowledge, all the other benefits. But clearly this piece about doing things together that you couldn't or wouldn't do by yourself is high up on the list. The other thing is that at the moment, I was going to say with this slide, currently there is no global forum for this to happen in the agribusiness space. I think perhaps since lunchtime there perhaps is, but these are the fruit on the tree that are ripe for picking, and hopefully the Global Agribusiness Alliance will be the way that those benefits can be harvested going forward. We also looked at what are the types of collaboration that you think have the greatest potential for impact and for scale. And they basically came into 3 buckets. The first was around correcting supply chain inefficiency. So this is an obvious one, increasing efficiency, great business case for doing it. If we go out a little larger, the idea of strengthening the whole idea of landscape level approaches. There's a lot of talk, a lot of activity around landscape level initiatives, the need to look at the watershed, to look at the whole landscape, to make sure things are happening at the right scale. And the third piece, which was the bigger piece, was around improving the business enabling environment. I think that the Global Agribusiness Alliance could work across all of those. If you look at the first one, correcting supply chain inefficiency, there are great new opportunities here to bring in some non-traditional partners, technology, machinery providers, electronic banking. We heard about the importance of the IT sector, logistics solutions. So supply chain inefficiency, but in a broader way than just talking customer and supplier, bringing in new actors. The second, strengthening the landscape approach, that requires full collaboration of the companies within a geographic or demographic reach. So, for example, bringing together grains with rice, soy, fruit. So bringing together partners who wouldn't normally perhaps work together. These will require broad consensus on the activities, probably working with local governments, river basin management, and infrastructure. And it would include things like development of agricultural development corridors, integrated farming, conservation areas, water resource management, those sorts of projects going on. And what was clear from this is the benefit here is that the respondents said it will be much easier to scale up infrastructure, better to provide banking and technology investment, if they are not limited to just one commodity. So there are good synergies here by having all of the commodities in one landscape working together. And then the larger piece, this is more, as we said, about doing things together you couldn't do by yourselves. These are fairly, can be structurally complex, lots of contributors across geographies. Things like, I suppose an example would be RSPO, Global Alliance for Climate Smart Agriculture, and so on. But I think what is clear is that people are looking, they see opportunities. Secondly, they are looking for action. And one of the comments I heard at lunch was around people saying, well, the GAA will it be a talk shop or is it about action? And listening to the energy there was this morning, looking at what people see as opportunity, there is clearly a big focus on action here, actually getting things done, whether it's within supply chains, whether it's across at the landscape level, or whether it's the bigger enabling environment. Clearly, action is what is on the agenda. So we'd like to present now, there were 4 recommendations are in the report, subject to your inputs today, of course. So the four recommendations. Firstly, collaboration should focus on smallholder livelihoods, and we've heard that today so much. Education and training forms a major investment component in this area, but companies don't report on the outcomes in a uniform way or look at the performance of their investment or how effective their training is at getting desired rates of adoption. We've heard only a small fraction of smallholders is currently reached. The focus of training tends to be on one commodity, one certification scheme, and not more broadly. So there are opportunities here for collaborative action. Significant opportunities to widen the scope of training beyond those single commodities and look at how to link the work here with other SDGs. The second of the recommendations is that activities should align with the INDCs on agriculture. We've heard how important agriculture is for the development of the INDCs, but currently no companies report broad collaboration on the INDCs. They have internal reduction targets, shadow carbon prices, they have obligations, but there's no obvious collaboration around it. And one of the things in the report suggests that we need to support transboundary collaboration on INDCs. That the climate is not in one country, it's not in one commodity, it's not in one supply chain. And the countries will have to work together on their INDCs. It makes a lot of sense to have this broad transboundary collaboration. And clearly, the agribusiness sector has a key role to support INDCs in those areas we saw that are vulnerable. Third recommendation is that we need new models of information sharing, public and private, and between competitors. We heard this already today. We don't have sharing. There's a lot of information out there. And so any future model of collaboration has to include data sharing, a facilitation of data sharing, open access to drive effective solutions at the maximum possible scale. Many companies cited the incompleteness or absence of public data as a barrier to investment, to planning, to scaling initiatives. And we need the data to look at the effectiveness of what we're doing. We heard from Andrew this morning, measure it was his first one. And if we can't measure it, we can't change it, and we can't scale it. Not many companies operate under the open data sharing initiatives. There are some like the Open Data Institute. I think Syngenta was the first private sector organization to do so at a crop and a farm level, but the large amounts of data held by companies could readily be used by both private and public sectors to build integrated and detailed information systems going forward. And the fourth and last is to exploit the interlinkages across the social and environmental SDGs, because from a base of sustainable agriculture, there are benefits across the board. It will build a critical mass of support because agriculture, as we said, is the biggest employer on the planet. It has the biggest opportunity to improve not just SDG 2, but all of the other SDGs on the list. So the report recommends map from a base of SDG 2 so that companies then become their investment ready. They can plan for collaboration across the development goals. So they're the four recommendations of the report. As I said earlier, we will include all of the input from today, your answers to the questions in the report going forward. But we'd just like to pick your brains now going forward. We have 3 questions for you. 1, this is the important one. Basically, if GAA starts today, what's number 1 on its list? What's the pre-competitive topic on your table you would like to address in collaboration? So all we want from each table is 1. We don't want a shopping list. So down to you, what's the 1 thing on your list that you would like to do, the GAA to do going forward in the pre-competitive space? Thank you. Okay, I'm working on the assumption that if you haven't agreed by now, you'll never agree. So we're going to go with it. I'm going to take 3 tables, and my colleague Matthew will be taking notes. So I will start with this table because they seem to have a smile on their face. Right, okay, we take this table first. What's the 1 thing?
Rationalization of certification standards.
Okay, that's a good one. Rationalization of certification standards. Thank you. We'll take, any volunteers? Anybody got a pressing need to get theirs on the table? Okay, can we take, well, how about, can we take the gender balance table in the middle? Sorry, this is becoming a theme now, so. Ladies and gentlemen.
We talked about pricing and externalities, carbon taxes, etc.
Okay, that's a small one for them to do. And thank you. And we'll have one more. Anybody else going to volunteer before I volunteer someone? We have a volunteer there. Yes, thank you.
Another gender balance table. We would like to suggest smallholders would be the focus.
Smallholder focus. We've heard that so many times today, so that's great to have that on the list. So thank you. So smallholders. Carbon and externalities, and we have the certification systems. Okay, thank you very much for that. Please write down, if you haven't got an Olam person with you on your table, put it on a piece of paper, your 1 thing. And if I just say, before you go out for tea, put them in a pile at the front here, it will save us coming round to find them. So thank you very much. You will see the full report when it comes out. I would just like to say a word of thank you to Matthew Reddy, my colleague who has been manning the questions. So thank you, Matthew, for taking the question part. Thank you all for your contributions. We look forward to getting back to you. Thank you.